just helping the guys, survive mentally for this duration, which just keeps getting extended and extended.
Yeah,
And
so originally there was a bit of work to get some documentation together. It's not the clearest as far as what's required.
Welcome to the Podcast for Inquiry, brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, a national educational charity supporting your community for reason, compassion, and secular humanist values. You have answers, we have questions. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood, board member and secular chair for CFIC. Welcome. On today's Podcast for Inquiry, I speak with Brian and Brent from Rocky Mountain Atheists, based in Calgary. Brian has been actively involved in the skeptic community since his university days. Brian remains engaged in conversations about skepticism, science, and secularism. Brent is a retired IT administrator. He is involved in supporting people who express doubt about their religious upbringing. In the summer of 2019, both Brian and Brent joined a Group of 5 sponsorship committee to bring a UN-recognized refugee, Omer, to Canada. In today's episode, Brian and Brent describe Canada's refugee system. They have worked to bring Omer to Canada through its Group of 5 refugee sponsorship program. When Omer expressed doubts about his faith, he had to flee his native country of Pakistan due to threats on his life. Omer has been living in hiding in Nepal for several years. Without further ado, I bring you today's Podcast for Inquiry. Brian, Brent, thank you for joining me today on Podcast for Inquiry.
thank you.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you today about something that I've always known has existed, but I actually don't know a great deal about. And that's Canada's refugee immigration system. So I know that you can come to Canada just as a regular immigrant, as a standard immigrant, if you're wealthy or educated or have skills, and there's a process and you get a visa and you come in, you're a permanent resident, and then you become a citizen. But unfortunately, we also live in a world where really terrible things happen, and Canada wants to help those that are fleeing persecution for various reasons. So just to start with, Brian, can you tell me what makes a person a refugee, to qualify as a refugee in Canada's immigration system, versus someone that just wants to come to Canada for love, for economic reasons, for maybe not for the weather, but for whatever personal reasons they may wish to. What makes someone eligible to be classified as a refugee versus a more standard immigrant to Canada?
Yeah, I think I don't know the exact definitions or whatever, but it's not a standard immigration into the country based off of merits and other things. It's because of some political turmoil in their country, because they've got a number of reasons for having to flee, to flee for their lives from their country, and war or just all sorts of different reasons. In this case, we sponsored a refugee who was fleeing because he had death threats, and he had people attack him and all kinds of things that he needed to escape from. So.
And just so people are clear, you're referring to Omer, which Rocky Mountain Atheists has sponsored to come to Canada, and whom I spoke with about a year ago here on Podcast for Inquiry, right?
Yes, that's right.
Now, we'll get into the details of Omer's case in a bit, but for now, I want to just sort of focus more generally on the Canadian refugee system. There's lots of it's not simply you're either come in as a standard immigrant or you can apply to come in as a refugee. There are lots of different programs, like just within the refugee application process, there are several programs within them. Can you give me a sense of the different ways in which a person can apply to be a refugee and come to Canada under those programs? What those programs are?
I think, maybe Brent could speak more, but
Sure.
we sponsored Omer to art with us was as a group of five private citizens. So any group of
So
five.
I mean, like, there's the group of five, less complex claims. There's a blended office referred program. So, like, I know that with Omer, there was a group of five. So, what is the group of five refugee program? It makes me think of like the group of seven nations that get together to coordinate economic policy. I'm pretty sure the group of five is something different. So, can you tell me what does that mean?
Yeah, it's just five individuals who are willing to sponsor and assist somebody come to Canada, help them get set up, help them find a doctor, get a job, all these types of things. But essentially help them through the process. But the process really starts for, well, in this case, years in the country that they're at, and try to survive until they can come to Canada. So I don't know what you want to speak to, Brent.
Yeah, so Canada has pretty well three privately sponsorship programs. We just mentioned the group of five. There's also a group under what's called the sponsorship agreement holders. That's typically That's typically larger groups. Could be some of them are religious groups. Others are. There's also community sponsors, but we're specifically uh, working under the group of five since we're a small organization, and it's just individuals who have taken an interest in helping someone who's under um, life-threatening condition like Omer. And just to backtrack a bit, the Canadian government will recognize a refugee based on the United Nations High Commission, I believe it's called, UNHC. So
UNHCR.
UNHCR, thank you. Yeah, so I think that for our group of five, anyways, that's one of the stipulations that the refugee has to be recognized under the UNHCR, which Omar is.
I remember going back uh, almost a decade now to the start of the Syrian civil war, and there was a huge exodus of civilians from Syria trying to flee because the the death toll and the devastation in that country was just immense. And a prime minister of the time, Justin Trudeau, basically said that Syrian refugees are welcome here. Are any of these programs that you mentioned, were they created due to that crisis, or did we just expand existing programs uh, to account for that, and under those programs is how we is how you sponsored Omer to come to Canada?
I don't know the history of when the group of five was created, type of sponsorship. I know other countries like the US have certainly been looking at it and thinking it's a good program, but yeah, it's yeah, I'm not sure when that first was formed. Brent, do you?
Group of Five has been around for quite a while, and it preceded the Syrian refugee, and I also understand the Afghanistan um, immigration too. And I think those programs were unique, special case scenarios, um, not directly affiliated with the private membership sponsorship programs.
I know that most of them are religious organizations though, like 99% of the people that do come in to the refugee program through the group of five and other programs are brought in through these religious organizations. And whether it's Catholic Church or other various churches, we're one of the very few that's not affiliated with a church of any kind.
Really? So that's surprising. So under the group of five, most of them are religious organizations or congregants, I suppose, of religious institutions that are bringing in uh, refugees to Canada.
Actually, that's more under the sponsorship agreement holders
Okay.
area. That's not typically the group of five. Yeah, the sponsorship agreement holders groups are the ones who are larger. They can they're a little more organized. They're a little more across Canada kind of thing. So they have a bit of the infrastructure that helps them um, do larger numbers of sponsors. The group of five more is just individuals who, as private citizens, have the desire to help out, and they're also a group of five are also uh, required to be in the same geographic area, same community, so that when that refugee comes to Canada, they have local support. So a group of five commit uh, for at least 1 year to help out this person in the local community. So, simple things or things we take for granted, like getting a doctor, getting looking for work, and other social supports. It's that's really a culture shock when someone comes to Canada, here in Calgary for us. So the group of five are local and provide um, um, individual support.
All right. So let's say someone is interested in sponsoring or bringing a refugee into Canada, and they want to do it under the group of five. So you need to find four other people that live in the same city or in the same proximity as you. You need to commit to helping them integrate or learn how things work in Canada and in the city where you're going to bring them. You need to support them, I guess, financially as well. You said for the first year. What other commitments are there for someone that might be interested in becoming a group of five or part of a group of five sponsor for somebody?
Yeah, the minimum requirements are five individuals. We actually do recommend you at least have one more as a buffer, just as we've experienced. There's sometimes long delays between the original application and the actual arrival of the person. So sometimes people leave, come and go, sort of thing. So yeah, minimum of five people. It is basically you um, bring this person in as um, a fellow citizen and help with all facets of integrating into the local community. So it's not just financial, but it is also on the social level. So you essentially become friends with this person, and if they have issues adapting, you help them find support groups and become this and be also the support group yourself.
So I know the two of you have been helping Omer come to Canada. I've been trying to bring Omer to Canada for several years now. Take me back to the beginning. Um, Tell me, Brian, you mentioned that Omer was attacked, was fearful for his life. Can you tell me why he was attacked, like why he fears for his life, and uh, how you, Rocky Mountain Atheists, found him and chose him to be the person that you want to sponsor to bring to Canada?
Yeah, so we originally formed a refugee committee, and we tried to help another person who couldn't come to Canada for various reasons. He didn't fit the criteria. He was fortunately resettled in Germany, but so then we looked for somebody else, and I was told about Omer through Center for Inquiry US, and through them we heard about his case and we connected with him, and then we looked at how we could could help him, because he had quite a traumatic experience from being basically taken against his will and tied up in a house and tortured and everything because he was questioning his faith. He was questioning Islam and had questions about it. And just for those reasons alone, he was attacked and tortured and then fearful for his life and fled the country and escaped eventually through India and then Nepal. And we just looked at his case and tried to see how we could help him come to Canada.
And I know that you know you and the Rocky Mountain Atheists and the Centre for Inquiry Canada have been supporting Omer in Nepal now for several years. Can you describe the uh, why he is still in Nepal, why it has taken so long, and why Omer is not yet in Canada? Like I understand that sometimes these processes take time, but it seems to me, as someone who's not an expert in these things, that this has taken much longer than even a reasonable amount of time and patience with the process would imply.
Yeah, there's actually there's quite a few reasons. It's just generally the excuse me the um, actual reality excuse me is that Canada is a very popular place for people who are looking to escape um, for various reasons. So we're I guess it's the success of the program is affected by the interest in coming. Um, Actually, Omer actually sent me some data that I wasn't even aware of until recently. There's for the group of five alone, there are 68,000 applications in the process or in the system now. Um, and the target by the Canadian refugee system is to for 2025 is to accept up to 23,000. So you do the math there. That's a 3-year backlog just right there. And unfortunately, because of political pressures, there's been a reduction in the number of the workforce handling the applications, and for specifically with Omar, there's a complication. He's not in a place that has a Canadian government presence. There is no official UN or Government of Canada High Commission in Nepal. So his application's handled out of Nepal, or sorry, out of New Delhi in India, which complicates things. And then, unfortunately, further to that, COVID came along, and that just threw a big wrench into the whole mechanics and created a huge amount of delays. So there's quite a lot of complications to specifically in this example to Omar's application. When we first looked at the process, there was guidelines indicating that it would be possibly, I think, 18 months to 23 months for the whole process, but that was in 2019. Then along
And this is 2019. When so you mentioned that there's like a 3-year backlog currently. If there were got 6 years ago, the guidance was 18 to 24 months. When was it that you first heard of Omer, and when was it that you decided that the group of five, were going to sponsor Omer to come to Canada? How long has it been since you made that decision?
It's been 5 years. It's been since late 2019, and then we formally submitted the application. I believe it was early 2020, right, Brent?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
February 2020 was the when
But
all the documentation was put together and submitted.
but my problem is, like, I understand demand exceeds supply, and there's a lot of people that want to come. There's, all over the world would love to come to Canada. My my biggest problem with the whole process is that they can't tell within a reasonable time frame. Like we were told originally, maybe it's going to be a year or 2 years. We thought maybe we'd get him fast tracked because of the death threats, but 5 years, it's just ridiculous. And Omer hasn't been able to work in Nepal because they don't allow it because he's a refugee. So he's basically had a life in limbo for these 5 years. And like I, equated to, like, I can order a pizza and be told it's going to come within 10-minute time frame window. Why can't we do something better? Why can't the system be somehow a little bit better than it is right now? Because having like just this indeterminate amount of time, and especially when you think it's going to be a year and then it becomes another year and another year and another year of somebody just sitting there in limbo. Why can't we make them productive? Why can't we, have them have some ability for them to work? Like, it seems like there has to be a better way than this current system.
I
It's
remember in my conversation with Omer last year, he mentioned that because he has to keep his identity secret, because people are looking for him, he has to move every 2 to 3 months. If he can't become rooted in a community. He always has to be mobile. Otherwise, he fears that the people that are looking for him will find him, and that his life would be in jeopardy if that were to happen. And on top of uh, not being able to work, not having any formal legal status within Nepal, where he currently is. So my heart does go out to him, and I hope that we're able to alleviate his uh, existing conditions sometime soon. Let's hypothesize that at long last he comes to Canada. Um, will Omer, like as a refugee who has just landed in Canada, just arrived in Canada, are there any restrictions on him? Like I assume he won't be a citizen on day one, so he won't be able to vote. But would he be able to work? Would he be able, like, are there any restrictions on his activities? Having been having once he arrives in Canada as a formal recognized refugee.
No, I don't believe there's any restrictions other than, like you said, being able to vote, that sort of thing. Yeah, he's basically a permanent resident when he gets here. There's certainly he's good with English. He's self-taught. He's himself English, so that's not a big barrier. But I think he's going to have some mental health issues. We're going to have
Mm-hmm.
to help him with, because he's gone through a lot. But otherwise, I don't think there's any real restrictions on him other than that. I don't know if he's allowed to travel out of the country for that first year or anything else. Not sure if there's any restrictions on that, but
And what's the pathway to citizenship? Like when he arrives, you said on day one he'll be a permanent resident, which is good. Uh, can he just be a permanent resident for the rest of his life? Does he become a Canadian citizen at some point? What's the process from arriving and being a permanent resident to becoming a citizen?
Brent, you
Well, our understanding is, the way he can, or he has the option to apply to be a permanent citizen. Sorry, a Canadian
citizen.
citizen. Is it 5 years or is it three?
I thought it's 3 years, I
Yeah,
believe.
it's
Yeah, as a
3 years.
permanent resident, 3 years, pass a test and everything else, just like anybody else.
Yeah,
You can
so
become.
he has the same opportunities as any other immigrant to Canada, um, to
Yeah,
become a Canadian citizen eventually, which we assume would be what he would want to do.
yeah. And there's such a push against immigration nowadays with what's happening in the south below us in the US and everything else. But to me, it's beneficial. It helps, like it actually helps fill a lot of the jobs that people don't want to do, and helps the economy overall. All the studies show that. So I don't, I don't understand why we don't do more than we're doing.
Yeah, well, that's kind of a broader political argument about is immigration good or bad? If it's good, how much? And then what type of people do we want to welcome into our country? I know that in Canada, as you mentioned, we're fortunate in that there are a lot of people around the world that want to come here, and we get to be, as a result of that, fairly picky. And so, at least from our standard immigration process, we have things like we have a point system, and you get points for things like: are you wealthy? Are you educated? Do you have skills that are in demand in Canada? And all of these are weighted in various ways. And if you get a high score, um, then the then it becomes very easy for you to come to Canada. But when it comes to a refugee, this isn't we're not evaluating refugees based on their personal characteristics, what their skills are, what their educations are, essentially what they can contribute to Canadian society. We are evaluating them based on circumstances that have been imposed upon them. They have been persecuted for their beliefs or their lack of belief, for their gender or identity or sexual preferences, the fact that they belong to some minority group that is persecuted politically or physically. Uh, do you have any thoughts on what the ratio, or how many people that we should be welcoming into Canada um, from a standard immigration perspective versus our refugee system? Like, because the criteria that we use to evaluate those two streams are very different.
Well, Canada has historically been um, a model country, I think, in the international world as far as having um, compassion and acceptance of diversity and needs for some people in very strenuous scenarios. And I think that is part of the appeal of bringing in refugees is as a society, we understand that, we have a global view of the world and feel the responsibility of um, being compassionate and having some empathy in in the plights of other people. So um, I, I think specifically for myself, I as a secular humanist, I see it being a goal to have that worldview. Just beyond the fact that we're humans are hypersocial creatures, so we're tight with our families and our local communities, and are sometimes described as our own tribe. But Canada as a whole, historically, at least in the last few decades, has um, expanded that to the point of seeing the world as, we're all in this together kind of thing. So that would be um, that should be the focus on the refugee system. And um, to some degree, it has done that. Unfortunately, there is so many people that seem to be in that difficult state. It's been very difficult to handle all of them.
Yeah, I know that there's calls that we need to fundamentally rethink how um, how we look at just immigration and refugees in particular. I spoke about a month ago with Gaia Vince, and she wrote a book called Nomad Century, and you can listen to that conversation if you wish. But her basic thesis is that 2 to 3 degrees of warming in the climate is baked in, even if we start taking climate change very seriously today, which does not seem to be what we're doing as a global species. Which means that there are going to be huge swaths of the world that are going to become uninhabitable basically between the tropics, and there's going to be a massive migration northward and to a lesser extent southward, just because that's what's going to be habitable. Uh, do you think that that Canada is capable of both the social mind shift change, as well as sort of the physical infrastructure changes that are going to be required to take in, not tens of thousands of people annually? Like you mentioned that there's 20 odd thousand. That's our target for refugees annually, but hundreds of thousands or even millions in a decade or so, when temperatures rise and places where tens or hundreds of millions of people live today start migrating out of where they have been because it is no longer suitable for human habitation.
Yeah, I mean, I tell my kids, I say, the day you were born in Canada is the day you won a lottery ticket. It's we should be helping other people in less fortunate situations, less fortunate countries, and climate change is going to affect poor countries, poor people a lot more than the wealthy people, wealthy nations that can adapt. So we're going to have to do, a lot, I think, especially more and more in the future because of climate change. And maybe it will be millions, and I'm not sure. I think Canada's going to have strains. We're going to need housing, and there's going to be, things that we're going to have to adapt here in Canada to take in all these refugees. But also, those are the people that are going to be building the housing. So we kind of need them as well for those trades. So.
What are the next steps for Omer? And do you have any idea when, more than 5 years later, since this process started, uh, when Omer will finally arrive in Canada?
Well, we've been informed that as of January 29th of this year, 2025, Omer's application was approved. So it's gone through the approval process. It's now just in the final stages of getting entry visas from Canada and exit visas from Nepal. Um, we have the unfortunate scenario that possibly because of the um, reduction in the workforce, it's not running as smooth as we were hoping. Omar did actually get a confusing request to present himself in the New Delhi High Commission office within 24 hours, which was totally impossible for him being in Nepal. So, unfortunately, there's a bit of a snafu right now where um, he has been approved, but there was the um, request that wasn't appropriate for him in his scenario. So what we've done is we've been actually working with one of our local MP's office, and there's a case worker in that office that I've been communicating with, who's actually been very helpful in trying to get some communication through the back channels. He has regular meetings with the IRCC in Ottawa, the Immigration Refugee Commission in Ottawa, and he's been very helpful. So a shout out to this person actually, and part of the Member of Parliament's office. So he's working with his contacts to clarify that. So we do have the constraint that Omar's approval has a timeline, which I think is it. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Brian, but I think it's something like
May,
May.
May 21 is
May
when his medical is going to expire, and then he'll have to redo a medical. Like he's been essentially approved for a year, I think, and so we need one signature from one person in this high commission in New Delhi. It's like one little piece of paper signature. He's been sitting for a year just waiting for this exit permit, and it's crazy. It's mind-boggling how ridiculous it is and how frustrating. But yeah, he's essentially got all the approvals, everything's done, and he's also got this medical done. But now he has a timeline where if we don't get his exit permit before this, and we need some time to get everything else in place and pay for these exit visas, exit fees that he's got to pay to Nepal. That which is about 17,000 US that he's got to
Oh my
pay just
goodness.
to leave the country. It's crazy because Nepal is not part of UNHCR. They charge refugees. I think it's $8 US per day, basically every day that he's there, even though he's not allowed to work. If he wants to leave the country, he's got to be able to pay these exit fees.
Okay, but how do you get from $8 a day to $70,000? I mean, like 3 years is 1,000 days. That's $8,000 for 3 years. If he's been there for 5 years, okay, that's going to be 16,000.
17,000
Oh,
for
17,000. I'm sorry, I misheard you.
17,000 US is
Okay,
what, and
which is still a substantial sum of money. Yes.
yeah, and he's raised money himself through people he knows and other organizations. We've raised some of that money from Atheist Alliance International. We raised some money from CFI US, and we've raised some money from CFI Canada, as well as Rocky Mountain Atheists here in Calgary. A lot of the people that are part of the organization have been helping sponsor Omer and help contribute to that 17,000. So we're just trying now to come up with the last of those funds so we can pay that as soon as we know he's got his exit permit and the letter comes, that we can then pay that exit fees and get his plane ticket and everything else and get him out of the country before his medical expires.
All right. So if one of our listeners is interested in helping financially with this process, where can they go?
That would
How
be,
can they?
I think the easiest, best way would be CFI Canada through your organization, because they can get a tax receipt and everything else for their donation if they're in
So
Canada. If they're not
yeah.
in Canada, then there's other organizations they could go through, or I'm sure they can figure out a way to contact you or us directly, I think.
So just in our show notes, there's a link to CFI, sorry, centerforinquiry.ca /donate. And if, as part of that donation, indicate that you want the funds dedicated to support Omer, and we will ensure that those funds are directed to support Omer while he stays in Nepal, and to bring him to his new home in Canada when finally these processes are completed and he's allowed to come.
Rocky Mountain Atheists, they can Google and find our website here in Calgary, and we'll certainly help make sure that those funds are directed towards that. But because it's a whole process where we've had to help support him live for those 5 years without being able to work for 5 years in Nepal. Then you got to pay 70,000 exit fees to Nepal, and then he's got to come here and survive as well. So we've still got a lot to do when we get him here in Calgary. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And
and he's going to,
all of this, everything that you've said is essentially just phase one, right? The first step, and then
he's already got all these people he owes money to. Like a lot of he's raised himself. He's basically told them he'll pay them back. He's also got to pay for the plane ticket. That's a kind of a loan from the Canadian government that he'll have to pay back. I think after 3 years or something, they start taking out of his taxes. So these refugees land in Canada hugely in debt. It's crazy.
And what has the experience been like for the two of you and the group of five? Like, just you've got your own lives, you've got, careers, homes, families, friends, interests. Uh, how much of your life has been dedicated to Omer over the last 5+ years?
Mostly just as a friend, just staying in touch with him, trying to help him, just, just keep your chin up and, keep going. It's going to happen eventually. It doesn't take a lot of time to do the whole sponsorship thing and put together the paperwork. It takes some, but it takes a little bit of commitment. But biggest thing is just helping the guys, survive mentally for this duration, which just keeps getting extended and extended.
Yeah,
And
so originally there was a bit of work to get some documentation together. It's not the clearest as far as what's required, and there's a need to really be very careful in the application. And a shout out to a Canadian support association that has helped out in that. It's called the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program, and they give a lot of information for people who are interested in the process. They do workshops, etc., and they were very helpful for us to when we started out, giving us some feedback on what needs to be done and the documentation, etc. And their recommendation was for the documentation, be very, very careful. It's easy to get rejected right away. Once that was taken care of, that was done in a few months process, late 2019 through to when it was officially submitted in February of 2020. So a bit of work there, not that much, but then as part of that, we also had to take care of some funding. We had to guarantee that there was sufficient funds in trust for Omer once he arrived, but that wasn't that wasn't that much either. Then now it's just the processing delays and the frustration of not getting any kind of feedback from the system, which is actually something that we haven't covered yet. But it's almost like it's a black hole where you have no direct communication with the people processing the application, and that's where once again I'll mention that potentially contact your local MP's office. They may be able to help in that. So it's been frustrating since 2020, but as far as time commitments, it's more like Brian said, it's a commitment. Or I mean, it's a just wanting to emotionally support Omer, and it's frustrating for us, but it's just emotionally draining for Omer. It's like it's an emotional roller coaster. It's almost like emotional trauma for Omer specifically, and other people in the waiting for this process to occur. So we've got it pretty easy, and compared to what Omer has been going through.
Yeah, it's just that uncertainty, that uncertain time frame. And there's no complaint department. There's nobody you could talk to with Immigration Canada. It's just you can submit something and you get back nothing. It is a black box. Fortunately, Brent was able to contact the local MP, and we found another channel sort of through that where we do get some feedback, but it's still very frustrating process.
looking ahead, let's say Omer has finally come to Canada and is settling in. Do you think that this group of five, or more generally Rocky Mountain Atheists, will sponsor somebody else? As tragic and as awful as Omer's circumstances are, what's even worse is that he is far from unique and he is far from the only one fleeing persecution, even if we limit that to fleeing persecution for not believing in the same faith as most of the others in his community. Do you think that that you or RMA will try to bring someone else to Canada?
Not sure about the group that sponsored Omer. I think we certainly have the experience that we could help others if they want to do it, at least if there's another group of 5 that wants to form. So, yeah, I'm not sure about the actual 5 members that are sponsoring Omer, though.
Yeah, there's still a commitment from us for, but 1 year after Omer arrives, we're committed. So we're still, that's still at least a year away. So I think it's a little too soon to know for sure if there's any capability of doing another sponsorship. The Rocky Mountain Atheists is a small organization, so at this point we only can commit to this one sponsorship, and it's. I think what Brian has said is we do have the experience, so we've lessons learned that we can pass on to other people who are looking at starting up a sponsorship committee. I unfortunately do have to put a bit of a downer on the process. As of now, there is a pause on any applications from Group of 5 or community sponsors as of November 29th, 2024. There's a 1 year pause, so there is no new submissions accepted, which is a definite.
That is in some ways a good thing for us because Omer, he's part of that backlog that they want to clear up. And so they have put this pause in place and supposedly hired more people to try and clear the backlog. So it's good for our current sponsorship of Omer, but yeah, bad for new people for now.
So
and who knows what the political environment is going to be moving forward.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Brian.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. If you go to, actually, I'm on the refugee sponsorship training program website, and they have indicated that this pause will be in effect until possibly December 31st, 2025. So that's not a good sign for anybody who's looking to put a new application in. Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
So, I want to thank both of you, Brian and Brent, for your efforts over the last half decade plus to try and bring Omer to Canada, and for your commitment to, quite literally save a life. I think that represents the best of secular humanist values. And thank you for sharing your experience with the entire process. Do you have any last thoughts for our listeners today?
Just, came to mind that also Omer himself said that he wants to help others in what has, his sort of situation. He wants to help others in the future himself from Canada when he gets here. So he definitely shares our values, and looking forward to the day he actually arrives and we can have a beer with him.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I'll be able to make it out to Calgary and meet him in person one day as well. Brent, any last thoughts from you?
No, I think everything's been covered.
All right. Well then, Brian, Brent, from Rocky Mountain Atheists, thank you for being my guest today on Podcast for Inquiry.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks, Leslie.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Brent.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review and showing your support at patreon.com/podcastforinquiry. Email us podcast@centerforinquiry.ca. We'd love to hear your perspective. The Podcast for Inquiry is brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada. We are a national educational charity supporting reason, compassion, and secular values. Help us support rational discourse and evidence-based decision-making by becoming a member at centerforinquiry.ca/join. CFIC is on the web, on Facebook, and you can follow us on Blue Sky at CFI Canada. Podcast for Inquiry is produced and edited by Zach Dumont and Martin Zielinski. Music by Anthony Lazaro. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblatt. See you next time.